"I'm not cheating, I'm just finally with someone who appreciates the real me," she said when I caught them at dinner. So I changed the locks and forwarded the photos to her sister. Now her whole family knows and she's sleeping in her car outside my house. Hey folks, before we jump into the video, please consider subscribing and giving a thumbs up if you're excited for more stories like this. Thank you. Let's dive in. I met Rachel on a Tuesday morning at this little coffee shop in Virginia Highland where I'd been editing photos from a wedding shoot the weekend before. She was at the next table, crying quietly into her latte, and when our eyes met, she gave me this embarrassed smile that somehow made her look even more beautiful than she already was. Turns out she just ended a 2-year relationship with some guy who'd been cheating on her with multiple women, and she was processing the betrayal in the only place that felt safe to her, surrounded by strangers who wouldn't judge her tears. "I'm so tired of players and liars," she told me after I offered her my extra napkins and we started talking. "I just want someone genuine for once. Someone who actually means what they say." As a freelance photographer who'd built my business on being reliable and straightforward with clients, that resonated with me. I'd seen too many people in this industry who promised the world and delivered disappointment, and I'd made my reputation by being the guy who showed up when he said he would and delivered exactly what was promised. Rachel seemed to appreciate that quality immediately, especially when I followed through on small things like calling when I said I would and actually showing up for our first date 15 minutes early. She was transitioning out of retail management and had this dream of becoming a yoga instructor, something that required expensive certification courses and months of unpaid training hours. Without hesitation, I started covering most of our shared expenses, dinners, groceries, her portion of activities we did together, so she could focus on her studies without the stress of stretching her reduced income. "You're the most honest person I've ever known," she told me one evening after I'd admitted to accidentally overcharging a client by $50 and immediately refunding the difference. "The way you're just transparent about everything makes me feel so secure. I've never had that with anyone before." I found myself planning our weekends around her certification schedule, researching the best yoga studios in Atlanta where she could observe classes, even helping her practice poses in my living room while she worked toward her teaching credentials. She'd light these expensive candles she bought with her remaining retail money and transform my practical apartment into something that felt spiritual and calm. "Most guys would think this is boring or weird," she said while holding a particularly challenging pose, "but you actually seem interested in what matters to me." The foundation of our relationship was built on what I thought was mutual respect and her appreciation for my reliability as a partner. She'd often mention how refreshing it was to date someone who didn't play games or make empty promises, someone whose word actually meant something. Looking back now, I realize I was probably the most stable thing in her life during a period of major transition, and she interpreted my consistency as the security she'd been craving after years of dating men who treated commitments like suggestions. About 8 months into our relationship, Rachel started attending what she called advanced training sessions that weren't part of her regular certification program. These mysterious workshops happened 2 or 3 evenings a week, always at different locations around the city, and she'd come home with elaborate explanations about energy work and chakra alignment that seemed way more complex than anything she'd mentioned before. "Tonight was incredible," she'd say, practically glowing as she walked through my door at nearly midnight. "We worked on opening our heart chakras through partner meditation, and I had this breakthrough about releasing old emotional patterns." The Rachel I'd fallen for had been practical about yoga, treating it as a career move and focusing on the business aspects of instruction, but suddenly she was speaking this new age language that felt foreign coming from her mouth. She also developed this sudden passion for healthy eating that bordered on obsessive, replacing the takeout dinners we used to enjoy with elaborate smoothie concoctions and raw vegetable salads that required expensive ingredients I'd never heard of. "Jason says that our bodies are temples and we need to honor them with pure fuel," she explained while blending some green mixture that looked like pond water. Jason was her supposed meditation mentor, a name that started appearing in her conversations with increasing frequency. According to Rachel, he was this enlightened teacher who understood spiritual growth in ways that traditional yoga instructors couldn't grasp. "He's helping me access deeper levels of consciousness," she told me one evening while getting ready for another late session. "Jason says I have natural intuitive abilities that most people never develop." The way she said his name had this reverent quality that made something twist uncomfortably in my stomach, but I told myself I was being paranoid. As a photographer, I developed a good eye for reading people and situations, and something about Rachel's energy felt different when she talked about these sessions. She was more secretive with her phone, more vague about specific locations, and there was this underlying excitement in her voice that reminded me of how she used to sound when we first started dating. One Thursday evening, I was delivering wedding photos to a client whose downtown loft overlooked one of those trendy farm-to-table restaurants that Rachel had mentioned wanting to try. While setting up my laptop to review the images, I happened to glance out the window and froze. There was Rachel, sitting across from a man I'd never seen before, and they were holding hands across the table in a way that definitely wasn't appropriate for teacher and student. I watched as he leaned forward and kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that she returned with obvious enthusiasm. My first instinct was to storm downstairs and confront them, but something made me reach for my camera instead. Years of capturing decisive moments had trained me to document first and react second, so I quietly switched to my telephoto lens and took several clear shots of them together, the hand holding, the kiss, the way they looked at each other like they were the only people in the restaurant. After getting the evidence I needed, I packed up my equipment, apologized to my confused client for cutting the meeting short, and drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The man had to be Jason, which meant every late-night meditation session had probably been a date, and every spiritual breakthrough she described was likely something much more physical than chakra alignment. The drive home gave me time to think clearly about my next move, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I went straight to my computer, uploaded the photos, and sent the clearest ones to Rachel's sister Michelle with a simple message. Thought you should know what Rachel's been up to. Michelle had always been protective of me, often joking that I was too good for her sister, and I knew she'd handle this information appropriately. Then I called a locksmith and paid extra for emergency service to have my locks changed within the hour. While waiting for the locksmith, I gathered Rachel's belongings into 2 boxes, her expensive yoga props, the designer clothes she'd bought with money she should have been saving, and all those spiritual books Jason had apparently recommended. I left the boxes by the front door and settled in to wait, printing out copies of the photos and rehearsing exactly what I planned to say. Rachel came home around 11:30, humming some tune and glowing with that post-date energy I'd stupidly attributed to spiritual enlightenment. I watched through the window as she tried her key repeatedly, growing more confused and frustrated with each failed attempt. When she started knocking, I held up one of the photos against the glass where she could see it clearly. The color drained from her face instantly, and she began pounding on the door with genuine panic. "Kevin, please let me in so we can talk about this like adults," she called through the wood, but I could hear the tremor in her voice that meant she knew she was caught. I cracked the door just enough to hand her the box of belongings, keeping the chain engaged so she couldn't push her way inside. "You can get the rest of your stuff this weekend when I'm not here," I told her calmly. "I'll leave it on the porch." "This isn't what it looks like," she started, but I held up another photo showing them kissing, which shut her up immediately. "Jason understands my spiritual journey in ways you never could," she finally said, tears streaming down her face. "What we have isn't physical cheating. It's about finding my authentic self and connecting with someone who gets the real me." The audacity of trying to rebrand adultery as self-discovery was almost impressive in its creativity. "This isn't about betraying you," she continued, her voice rising with desperation. "It's about personal growth and becoming the person I'm meant to be. You're so practical and grounded that you can't understand the deeper connections some people need." I listened to her elaborate justification with the same detached interest I'd used to observe a particularly delusional client trying to negotiate down my rates. "You're right," I said finally. "I don't understand cheating and lying and calling it spiritual growth. That must be one of those deeper connections I'm too practical to grasp." "Don't be sarcastic," she snapped. "This is bigger than just physical attraction. Jason and I have a soul connection that transcends normal relationship boundaries. What we share is pure and honest, unlike the way you try to control me with your stability and reliability." The irony of calling her affair honest while lying to my face for months wasn't lost on me, but I was done engaging with her twisted logic. "Here's what's going to happen," I told her through the gap in the door. "You're going to take your spiritual journey somewhere else, and I'm going to find someone who thinks reliability is a good thing in a partner." She spent another 20 minutes cycling through tears, anger, and desperate bargaining, explaining how Jason had opened her mind to possibilities I'd never shown her, how their connection was destiny, how I'd never understood her need for adventure and transcendence. "You can collect the rest of your belongings this Saturday between noon and 3, I said, closing the door on her speech about soulmates and karmic connections. Through the window, I watched her stand there for 10 more minutes, probably waiting for me to change my mind and beg her to stay, but I'd already moved on to uploading the photos to cloud storage and changing my Netflix password. Michelle didn't waste any time putting the photos to good use, and by Friday morning, Rachel's entire family had seen the evidence of her spiritual awakening. Their parents, who attended church every Sunday and had raised their daughters with traditional values about commitment and honesty, were absolutely horrified by what Michelle showed them. Mom called Rachel's behavior disgusting and shameful. Michelle texted me later that day. Dad said he didn't raise a daughter to be a cheater and a liar, and they're both refusing to speak to her until she comes to her senses. The family group chat that Rachel had been removed from was apparently full of disappointed relatives expressing their shock that sweet Rachel could deceive someone as good as Kevin. Meanwhile, Jason was discovering that having an affair with someone was very different from actually dealing with their emotional baggage full-time, and when Rachel started showing up at his apartment unannounced with suitcases and tears, demanding to move in and make their soul connection official, he blocked her number and disappeared faster than a deadbeat client avoiding payment. Turns out enlightened spiritual mentors aren't so enlightened when their married girlfriend becomes homeless and clingy, expecting them to provide the same stability they'd helped her throw away. Rachel had given up her apartment lease 2 months earlier, planning to officially move in with me after her certification was complete, which left her with nowhere to go except her car when Jason's transcendent love evaporated overnight. She started camping outside my house around day 3, sleeping in her Honda Civic and leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that I saved but never returned. "Kevin, I know I messed up, but I'm literally living in my car because I have nowhere else to go," she sobbed into my phone at 2 in the morning. Jason turned out to be exactly like every other guy I've dated, and now I realize what I had with you was real and pure and I threw it away for a fantasy. Her Instagram stories became a daily soap opera of dramatic posts about fake family members who abandon you when you need them most, conditional love, and how society punishes women for following their hearts. Some people would rather judge than understand the complexity of human connection. She posted over a photo of herself crying in her car. Real family supports you through growth, even when it's messy. The irony of calling her a fair growth while living in a parking lot wasn't lost on her former yoga classmates, who started distancing themselves after the story spread through Atlanta's surprisingly small wellness community. The yoga studio where she'd been doing her student teaching hours as part of her certification program decided they no longer wanted her completing her requirements there when the owner heard about the cheating scandal. "We've decided to go in a different direction with our student teacher program," the studio manager told her, which everyone understood meant they decided to go in a direction that didn't involve scandal and drama. Rachel tried to control the narrative by painting me as emotionally unavailable and controlling to anyone who would listen, claiming that I'd stifled her spiritual growth with my practical nature and driven her to seek authentic connection elsewhere. "Kevin was so emotionally closed off," she told our mutual friend Sarah when they ran into each other at Whole Foods. "He never understood my need for deeper meaning and personal evolution. I had to find someone who could meet me on a soul level." But Sarah had already seen the photos Michelle was sharing, and she shut down Rachel's victim narrative immediately. "Girl, you cheated on the most loyal guy in Atlanta while he was paying your bills," Sarah told her. "Don't try to make this about spiritual growth when you were just sneaking around behind his back like a common cheater." Word spread quickly through our friend group about Rachel's increasingly unhinged behavior, the car camping, the dramatic social media posts, the attempts to rewrite history and make herself the victim of my alleged emotional unavailability. People who'd known us as a couple were seeing a side of Rachel they'd never witnessed before, and it wasn't pretty. Her desperation was becoming more obvious by the day, especially when she started showing up at places where she knew I'd be, trying to create opportunities for accidental encounters where she could plead her case. "I saw Rachel at your coffee shop yesterday," my friend Mike texted me. "She looked rough, man. Like she's been sleeping in her car," which I guess she has been. "She tried to pump me for information about whether you're dating anyone new." The whole situation would have been pathetic if it weren't so predictable, the cheater becoming the victim, the liar demanding understanding, the person who'd thrown away stability complaining about the consequences of her choices. Rachel's transformation from confident spiritual seeker to desperate car dweller happened so quickly that even people who didn't know the full story started questioning her judgment and character. Her social media followers began commenting on her posts with increasingly skeptical responses to her victim narrative, especially when she started posting cryptic messages about toxic masculinity and how men use financial security to control women who are trying to find themselves. After 2 weeks of Rachel camping outside my house and leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails, I decided enough was enough when she started following me to work shoots and trying to intercept me at client locations. The final straw came when she showed up at a family portrait session in Piedmont Park, creating a scene that nearly cost me the booking and definitely traumatized a couple of kids who didn't understand why the crying lady was yelling at their photographer about soul connections and emotional abandonment. I filed for a restraining order the next morning, presenting the judge with printed screenshots of her threatening texts, photos of her car parked outside my house for 14 consecutive days, and testimony from 3 clients who'd witnessed her disruptive behavior at professional shoots. Mr. Thompson, this appears to be a clear case of stalking and harassment, the judge said while reviewing my evidence. The restraining order is granted, effective immediately. The court order requiring Rachel to stay at least 500 feet away from my home and workplace was served by a deputy sheriff who found her asleep in her car outside my neighborhood Starbucks at 6 in the morning, probably waiting to ambush me during my usual coffee run. Around the same time the restraining order was being processed, I got hired for a pet photography project at a local veterinary clinic that was updating their website and marketing materials. The vet, Nicole, was this incredibly calm and professional woman who managed to wrangle 15 different animals during our shoot while maintaining the kind of grace under pressure that I'd thought was extinct in Atlanta. "You handle chaos really well," she told me while we reviewed the photos on my camera. "Most photographers would have lost their minds trying to get a decent shot of that hyperactive golden retriever, but you just adapted and kept working." When I mentioned that I'd had some recent practice dealing with unpredictable behavior, she laughed and asked if I was talking about difficult clients or personal drama. "Both, actually," I said, and found myself explaining the Rachel situation in broad strokes while we waited for the clinic's ancient computer to process the photo files. Nicole listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully when I described the restraining order and Rachel's escalating desperation. "Sounds like you handled that whole mess with a lot more class than she deserved," Nicole said. "Some people think drama means passion, but really it just means chaos. Give me someone steady and reliable over exciting and unpredictable any day of the week." That conversation led to coffee the next week, which led to dinner the following weekend, and before I knew it, I was dating someone who actually appreciated the qualities Rachel had found boring and limiting. Nicole never rolled her eyes when I showed up early for dates, never complained about my practical approach to planning activities, and actually seemed impressed when I remembered details from previous conversations. "You listen to things that matter to me," she told me one evening when I surprised her with tickets to a veterinary conference she'd mentioned wanting to attend. "Most people hear what they want to hear, but you actually pay attention." The restraining order worked exactly as intended, and within a month, Rachel had disappeared from Atlanta entirely, moving to Jacksonville to live with some distant cousin who'd apparently agreed to let her crash on a couch while she got back on her feet. Her social media presence became a steady stream of bitter posts about toxic masculinity, family betrayal, and how society punishes women for following their authentic paths, but the engagement dropped off dramatically when people realized she was just recycling the same victim narrative over and over again. Meanwhile, my photography business started thriving in ways I'd never expected, partly because word spread through Atlanta's tight professional community about how I'd handled personal chaos without letting it affect my work quality or client relationships. "Kevin Thompson doesn't let drama interfere with delivering what he promises," one client wrote in a 5-star review. "Complete professional even when dealing with personal nonsense that would derail most people." 6 months later, at our mutual friend Sarah's wedding, Rachel's dramatic downfall was still the subject of whispered conversations during cocktail hour, with people marveling at how someone could destroy a perfectly good relationship for a fantasy that lasted exactly as long as it took her lover to realize she came with baggage. Nicole and I enjoyed the celebration quietly, dancing to songs Rachel used to hate because they were too traditional and romantic, watching Sarah marry someone who actually deserved her commitment and loyalty. "Whatever happened to that girl who was stalking you?" Nicole asked during a slow dance, genuinely curious but not particularly concerned. "Last I heard, she's in Florida posting Instagram wisdom about knowing your worth and not settling for men who can't handle strong women." Nicole laughed softly, the kind of genuine amusement that comes from someone secure enough in themselves to find absurdity funny rather than threatening. "Strong women don't cheat on loyal partners and then play victim when there are consequences," she said simply. "They handle their business with integrity." Looking at Nicole in that moment, beautiful, intelligent, successful in her own right, someone who valued honesty and reliability instead of finding them boring, I realized that Rachel had actually done me the biggest favor of my life by showing me exactly what I didn't want in a partner and clearing the path for someone infinitely better.